Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Made on Purpose. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Made on Purpose. Today, I have Julianna Davidson with us. I'm so glad you're here, Julianna.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's quite interesting how we met. I visited your school with our local MLA.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, you'd sent me a friend request on Facebook. And then I'm like, checking you out because I creep everybody.
Of course, that's what you do on Facebook.
I'm like, oh my goodness, this lady has a story. And through that, I also found out about you writing your book, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. Remind me of the name of the book because it slipped my mom brain.
His Sweet Sustenance.
Yes, I literally just said it like minutes
ago.
Worries.
The sustenance part is like, we have to practice because it doesn't just fall right off the tongue. But it's what God told me to. So I wrestled with a bunch of sustaining. I'm like, no, it has to be this. So, yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, I actually ordered your book a little after I'd seen that it had been released. I think I actually signed up to get it pre-release.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I sat down and I read it in a day.
Oh, wow.
I just sat down and I read it, maybe 2 days, but I was like, oh, these are so interesting. That. So we'll touch a little bit more on that. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do, where you're from, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I am originally from Nova Scotia. So I lived there until I was about 22. And then it was my lifelong dream to become a teacher. Since I was 5, I've been teaching. Mm-hmm. I would always teach in my room. And my mom was a teacher as well. So it was just what I wanted to do. And so right out of high school, went and got my ed degree and then ended up finding a job here in Grand Prairie. Mm-hmm. So packed up and moved away. When I was 22, I moved out here. And so I've been here for 12 years now. Wow. And yeah, time flies. I cannot believe it. And so I'm at Grand Prairie Christian School. Mm-hmm. And currently I'm teaching a grade 5-6 split class, but I've taught some grade 5 by itself and then grade 1 for many years before that, which I really loved. So that's my professional life, I guess, and my background. I have an 8-year-old daughter who is just amazing and she's just full of joy and she's just such a light in my life. Mm-hmm. And that's been a really cool journey. I adopted her when she was 3 years old. So I've had her for 5 years now. Yeah. And just watching her grow and just see how God has used our story and how God brought us together has been so beautiful. Yeah. And then I just recently got married. It'll be 2 months on Friday that we've been married.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
You're still honeymooners.
We really are. It's still I still have the smile that I can't get rid of. And it's been a really wonderful summer. And just this season of just so much blessing. And we're just so thankful. So it's been really, really cool.
Right now, what you've just painted for us is a picture of the restoration of God in your life.
100%.
Because what people may not know is there's a whole lot of backstory.
Yes.
There's
a journey.
It's a journey. Yeah. And I just love that. I love the realness of your story. And I love that you're willing to share some of that with us today too. So you moved out here from Nova Scotia. You come all the way across the country at 22. Yep. Even that's a big deal. Yep. You left your family behind.
Yep. Yeah. I did.
So tell us a little bit about that. Why not stay there? Why come to Alberta? I know that lots of people say because of the work and everything, but what brought you to Alberta? Yeah,
it's when I reflect back, it's cool because God definitely led me here. But I had always planned to stay in Nova Scotia. My dream was to just stay by my family. And so when I did tell my family my new plan, they were all shocked because it just wasn't the Julianna that they knew. So I think part of it was the job situation in Nova Scotia was not great. I would have been subbing for 7 to 8 years, they said, and I just wasn't interested. But I think the bigger reason behind it is I had a pretty difficult decade, I guess you'd say. Just adolescence wasn't easy. And then I ended up, when I was in university, meeting someone that I had gone to school with when we were kids. But we got reconnected and we're dating, and then we eventually ended up getting engaged. So it didn't work out. And that is totally, when I look back now, I can see God's protection and provision in that. Mm-hmm. And I have no hard feelings about it now. I bless him and his family, and I can just see just where we were in our lives and how it wasn't meant to be. And so it was, as much as I have that perspective now, when you're 19 years old and you think that you found the love of your life and you have your wedding planned. And so it all just fell apart 2 or 3 months before the wedding. And so that was just soul crushing, honestly. All of my plans, all of what I thought my life was going to be just came to this halt, but not even a halt, just it fell apart. And so I did finish my degree and And like God definitely healed and helped me through that season. But there was a brokenness there,
Mm-hmm.
that I think I just wanted a new start. I wanted to go somewhere fresh where I didn't feel like not the shame, but like the pity, or just like the people like
Yes.
had heard that I was engaged, but now I wasn't. And like dealing with their reactions. It was this
Yeah.
season of like, ugh, I just want to be done with this.
Yes.
And so I had actually come to work in Jasper for a summer, like during university break. And that was my first time out west. That was an interesting experience to say the least. But it was really cool because it got me out here and then got me interested in the west side of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went to a job fair and saw that there was a job in Grand Prairie, I applied, and I it's so stupid now being here because I'm like, Jasper, Alberta and Grand Prairie, Alberta have nothing in common.
Not
But
even.
in my head, I was like, cool, I've been here. It's only like 5 hours away. Like, great.
Yeah.
And then I remember my biggest thing was I looked on Google Maps and I was like, oh, there's a Costco. Like, I'm like, if they have a Costco, like it's a big enough city. Like, so that was my like, yes, I can go live there. So yeah, I think it was just having a fresh beginning, and just, I think the
Mm-hmm.
beginning provided hope for me. And yeah, even that was a journey once I got here, but it was just, I needed a new start,
Yeah.
and just to kind of rewrite what I thought my story was going to look like.
Yeah.
Um, and then the process of giving that over to the Lord, which
Yeah.
has been a continual process and still is.
Right.
But yeah, and I was 22. So as much as I thought I
Yeah.
was all grown up, I was still so young in so many ways.
Yes.
And again, looking back now, I'm like, oh, God was so gracious. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I can relate on so many levels. And even that, just wanting to kind of get out of that smaller crowd and not be the person that everybody knew went through a heartache. And
Right.
it's like, you don't have to you're not walking on eggshells around me. Don't pity me.
Yeah.
Just can you treat me normal? When I was divorced, I went to a church. It was wonderful. The community just loved and accepted me, but I didn't want to be the newly divorced single mom in the group all the
Right.
time. I didn't want, how was court this weekend? Like, as much as I needed people to understand what I
Yeah.
was going through, I didn't want to be that person.
Yeah.
So when I moved cities, I went to a massive church,
Yeah.
massive church. And I was like, okay, you know what? I actually just need to blend in for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
and just nobody needs to know all of my stuff. I just need to be and kind of try and figure it out a little bit, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So I totally get that. And I love how coming out here was the beginning of a fresh start for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Juliana, you were 19
Yes.
when this picture of your life, getting married and everything kind of fell apart. That's actually a really big deal.
Yeah.
And then moving out here at 22, you're still so young. I know when I was in my early 20s, I felt like I was old already. Like
Yeah.
I knew everything. But looking back now, it's like, oh my gosh, I was barely a grown up, right? And so that's a really big deal, moving out here on your own. And then you started working at the Christian school.
Yeah.
So tell me about this transition into Grand Prairie and trying to build a life, trying to make community. And how were you handling the first years that you came here? Maybe connecting with community. Did that work? Did that not? What were some of the bumps in the road that you experienced
Yeah.
coming to build your new life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it didn't unfold how I anticipated, which is how life goes. I think that's normal. I think anyone that remembers when I moved here, it probably from the outside looked pretty great. Like,
Right.
I was young, starting at the Christian school, which I loved. And honestly, working at the Christian school has been one of the biggest blessings. It's been such a wonderful community.
Mm-hmm.
People just support and love me, especially being single for so long and being out here on my own. I've had so many invites for like Thanksgiving dinners and just like making sure that I wasn't alone. And so that was great. And my church was great. Honestly, there was so much great. I was not in a great place. I think I was still in this mindset of me being able to like fix things. And I think it took me a long time to get to a place where I would acknowledge this, but I think I had full hope when I was younger. And then when everything fell apart with my fiance at that time, I think I was so hurt, but I think part of me was just angry with God.
Yeah.
And just kind of like, how could you let this happen? Or like, why did you let it get to this point? And then like, this is embarrassing. Like I just had anger and questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I had a good relationship with Jesus and my faith in him. But I think that some ways we function like, we're like, okay, God, I'll give you this and this and this, but this is mine.
Yes.
And so I think the relationship thing was, this is mine. Like I gave you a chance. You messed it up. So I'm going to try it my way, which
Yes.
is really harsh to say, but I think
Yeah.
that's where my heart was.
Yeah.
And so I came out and it was just a fresh start. And like my intentions were still good. Like I wasn't in this completely rebellious state, but it was, I was like, I'm gonna just put myself out there and like try to start dating again and that kind of thing. it did not go well.
Yes.
it I think I was young. I had moved here by myself. Really nobody knew me. And I went from having like full accountability in the sense that I was surrounded by family and friends to coming here and a lot of freedom that I had never
Mm-hmm.
experienced before. And I think that that actually was bad for me. It was not that I planned it, but I think I didn't have the accountability from people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I did start dating and I tried to use my best judgment. I tried to like have my boundaries and things like that. But when you're broken and you just want to
Yes.
be wanted and you want to be loved and you want
Mm-hmm.
someone to see you, I think it's very easy to let go of some of those boundaries or give in
Mm-hmm.
ways that you shouldn't or that you hadn't even planned. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have this in front of your face, it's really easy to mess up in those moments. And so, yeah, when I look back, I had a time where I felt shame and anger towards myself, and now I can look back with a perspective of grace and seeing that I'm redeemed. But I had
Mm-hmm.
a season of making not great decisions and just
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't as close with Jesus as I should have been. And so I was finding I guess my intimacy in different ways and just I made decisions that were not God honoring in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to suffer the consequences for them as well. And I think because I had no accountability and because I was in it all alone, Satan's very good at making you want to stay in the dark, right? There's
Right.
that fear of like, if
Yeah.
anybody knows what you're actually doing, like,
Yes.
and so trying to handle that and carry that by yourself is like debilitating, honestly.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple, it was about a year that it was just rough. Like I felt like I was fake and I wanted to make changes, but I was so scared to tell anybody that I was just like in this cycle, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I finally was able to confide in some friends that I had, and I'm so thankful for them. I'm so thankful for the fact that they weren't not judgmental and they were just loving.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I think my biggest fear was judgment, and I had already had enough judgment on myself. But so yeah, I confided in a couple friends like where I was and how it's not where I wanted to be, and the pain that I had caused myself and even others, and then they helped me kind of take the necessary steps to like leave a relationship or like go be accountable to the people that I should. And so I
Mm-hmm.
took those steps. And so there was some really crappy months, I'm not gonna lie, of having those tough conversations, being
Yes.
accountable, making changes, like really looking at myself and seeing like, okay, like this is the path you're on. If you don't make changes, is this where you want to go? I'm so thankful because even when we like confided in some of the pastors at my church, or even my boss at my school, because I did get to the point where I just laid it all out. I honestly was met with love. Like
Mm-hmm.
we dealt with the things, but I was met with love, and I think that that's what helped me continue, right?
Yeah.
And so then it was like the healing, and I mean, there's healing from that point and from things before in my life, but
Yeah.
that's when I really dug deep into seeking help for myself
Mm.
and going to see a counselor, taking part of different programming at church that was helpful for just finding freedom and healing and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it was like this crazy journey of doing that, and then I feel like that was like a 5-year journey or more. Then I ended up adopting my daughter, and then that just put a whole nother layer because I just was like, now I'm not just responsible for myself; I'm responsible for another human, and my choices affect
Yes.
another life. And so then that even slowed down any more dating processes because I was like, everyone just stay away. So when I had friends say that to me, just like you
Yeah.
are just like really determined right now, I think you'd be intimidating to anybody, and I
Yeah.
was like, I was
Yeah.
just focused on this, but
Your mama bear came out.
yeah,
Yeah.
but honestly, it was a beautiful time, and so I'm thankful for that. I think
Yeah.
my biggest thing was I didn't realize just how much anger I had towards men,
Mm.
and that was something that God had to reveal through more things, and so that was a process, and I can see a lot of growth there. And
Yeah.
just even I was in a program at my church that was amazing, and so it was funny to see because like the people that I started that program with got this like unfiltered like I hate men. Like it was rough.
They're like, oh.
Yeah, and like validly for some of the things that had happened, like
Yeah.
there was some good reasoning there, but still, it was just a very intense. And so like
Mm-hmm.
we go through this program, we've done a lot, and there's still more to heal, but like, and then like they see me a little while later, and I'm like engaged, and then I'm getting married, and I had one girl that like hadn't seen me, like she came at the beginning of group and then hadn't seen me until she met me, and she's like, "What?" She's like, "But you hated men." I was like, "Well, we got over that. We worked through it."
Yes.
So it's been really, really redeeming, and just to see where I was and where I could have been, and
Mm-hmm.
where God has me now, and His grace in the circumstances,
Yeah.
and the beauty that I'm able to experience now being married and experiencing things the way that God intended them to be
Right.
has been absolutely amazing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm going to pull you back
Yeah,
a
sure.
little bit. That was
That's a
fantastic.
lot.
Yeah. There's so many little things in there though. And one of the first things I was catching on was, when you were kind of putting yourself back out there in the dating world, you said something along the lines of, I didn't have bad intentions.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it right.
Yeah.
But I was broken.
Yeah.
And so you were broken and hurting. You didn't have the same sort of community. You didn't have the same sort of accountability.
Yeah.
And I I think that's really important for people to understand. Like, and it's not even just young women, it's women at any age, maybe have gone through a divorce or, a similar type of
Yeah.
relational hurt, abuse, whatever. And you're broken on the inside.
Yeah.
And you don't really realize it until you try and go and function normally and you realize, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
my function is now dysfunction. And so
100%. Yeah.
and so like for those women and those young adults, those younger girls out there, I just recognize that you aren't what your brokenness says that
Mhm.
you are. And because you find yourself in a situation that you thought, I never thought I would ever do something like this. I never thought I would say something like this. I never thought I would date someone like this. I never thought I would cross those lines that I just crossed. And then, like you said, the shame that you struggled with and felt and battled with and you wanted to stay hidden. I know that so well
Mm.
because in my own journey and in my brokenness, I remember, and in my isolation as well, because it was quite an isolating time for me, isolated time, and thinking, I can't believe that I've behaved this way. I can't believe I've done the things that I've done. And if anybody knew, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
But when I walked that road, we've talked before, so we have some similarities,
Yeah.
like different, but similar.
Yeah.
People will understand. So when I walked that road, I saw myself differently. And I never started seeing myself as poorly as I did, 6 months into it. But, I had standards. I'm going to date a good Christian guy. He's got to love the Lord. And honestly, everybody I dated said that they were.
Yep.
And it all started off good. And then, things go bad.
Yep.
They mistreat you, you cross the line, whatever. And it started, okay, when this went on for a while, and I got to the point I expected to be mistreated.
Yep.
I expected, a guy to try and touch me in ways that he shouldn't. I expected him to try and get physical with me, the first time that we met. And I literally had no more fight in me because I thought,
Yeah.
I guess this is what it is. And I look back and I think, how could I think that? And so there was so much shame
Yeah.
as well. But looking back, and I know you looking back too, you can see, hey, that was a very broken me. That
Yeah.
was a very isolated me. And I can see all these factors that put me in this position that really fostered the brokenness and the dysfunction. And so to have some grace for yourself if you're finding yourself in that situation right now and to be intentional about finding community.
Yes.
You were saying about you brought it to the light.
Yeah.
That wasn't an easy thing to do. You found somebody to be accountable to, some trusted friends. And that was the beginning of a turnaround. I can just imagine the weight that would come off, once you say, hey, this is what my life's actually been like. Can you guys partner with me? Can you walk alongside me? I need to change. That must have been liberating for you.
It was so liberating, and it still is. And it's at the point where I lived with this secrecy for, it wasn't it was a segment of time. It wasn't like it was so long, but I remember it so clearly, just that heaviness. And then when that was exposed, and then it was in the light, and then there was just this freedom and this peace. And there were still consequences. It wasn't ta-da! There were still bad things that had to be worked through. Yeah. There were still really embarrassing moments. There was some ickiness. But the freedom of being in the light and then still being loved was so beautiful. So to the point now, I don't, if anything feels at all like it's in secrecy, I'm nope, bring it to the light, because I just don't even want anything to be there. So
right, that you've tasted that freedom.
Yeah.
The light brings life. And I love too, you were saying how you brought these things to some trusted friends. You exposed what had been hidden.
Yeah.
And you were met with love. And I've heard stories like that now a number of times. I was so afraid to speak up because I was sure they were going to fire me. I was sure, you're such a bad Christian and blah, 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 and just heap on the condemnation, but being met with love. And that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's the body of Christ. And there's an old song, I don't know if you know of Chuck Girard, way back when I was growing up. I don't think he ever got big, but we had a cassette tape and he sang a song and it was Don't Shoot the Wounded.
Okay.
He said, don't shoot the wounded. They need us more than ever.
Yeah.
They need our love no matter what it is they've done, right?
Yeah.
And so if people have friends or acquaintances or something and they think, oh my goodness, what is she doing? She did this horrible thing. She must not even be a Christian anymore. Maybe she doesn't even love God. Don't make that judgment too quickly,
Oh, yeah.
because in brokenness, people do things that they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
And so put a break on the judgment
Yeah.
and pray for them,
Yeah.
love them. And that was a huge part of your healing.
Yeah. And I think like I never once questioned my salvation in the midst of all of the
Mm-hmm.
darkness. And I still know that God was with me. Like there were times that I left awful situations and got in my car and prayed. And it was like an ugly,
Yes.
nasty prayer of like, God's like, save me from this. But like he was still very present and very there.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just so many factors.
Yeah.
But he was there. And honestly, like this is where God uses his grace, allows all these things to be used for his good. And so that darkness and that time, like I finally had to run somewhere and I finally ran to him, and it created a closer relationship with God than I ever had. Right. And so even though if I could go back, I definitely would do things differently. I love how God used it, and just the closeness that came from that.
There's a beauty that comes in brokenness.
100%.
And I don't wish brokenness on anybody, but I do wish that everybody could experience that place where you get to where he's your only answer.
Yeah.
It's like he's everything you need and nothing else matters, And suddenly you have this audience of one, and it's so clear and it's so pure. There's such a beauty in that.
For sure.
So you brought it to the light. You were talking to your pastors. You were talking about going through counseling. People shouldn't be afraid to go to
Oh,
counseling.
no, me and my counselor. I bring it up all the time. It's a regular part of my life.
Yeah, I mean, let's just humble ourselves and realize everybody should go at some point,
Oh, yeah.
and probably several times. But and so there's a healing journey,
Yeah.
and probably layers, right? And then, okay, so you also brought up that you adopted your daughter.
Yes.
And for those of you that aren't catching on to this, you were still single.
Yes.
So had you thought about that for a long time? Like, I know like there was this desire to be married and to have a family.
Yeah.
And so tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, it's a cool story. So yeah, I still wanted to have marriage and family. I wanted all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know what God had planned for me, and I really struggled with it. And it just seemed like every time I did try, it just didn't work out. And then I was like, don't want to go back there. So it was just like I'd go on one date and then it'd be like a 2-year hiatus, which obviously doesn't work well. But anyway, so I was trying to give it to God, but I also knew that I loved kids. Like I became a teacher because I loved kids. I know lots of different people that have adopted or are adopted. And so I just loved that idea. And so, yeah, adoption was on my radar for quite a long time. I started with just fostering. And so I counted up once. And I think I had over like 50 different kids in my home.
Wow.
Over like a 2 or 3 year period. So
while you were teaching?
yes, it was.
Oh my.
I look back and I'm like, I could never do that again. And so it wasn't always full time. Like sometimes it was respite on weekends and stuff. But there were segments of time. There was times when I had like 5 kids in my house. I look now and I'm like, no. But it was really cool. So yeah, so through that process, all of the workers and stuff kind of knew me as well. And so then I finally looked into adopting. And so I was told it would be a longer process because I was single, just because a lot of the needs of the children. And I'm like, that's fine. I had prayed about it, and I did feel this peace when I did it, that I was giving it to God. And so if it was in his will, then he would open doors. And if it wasn't, he would close them. And I was very confident with that. I felt like I held it open handed in that way.
Yeah.
And so I think that was about 5 or 6 years into the fostering world that came about. And so there were some girls along the way, or not some girls, some children along the way, that in my mind I was like, oh, I could adopt this one. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a couple of times I had looked into it, and then they're just like, no, sorry, like the needs are too high. And I was like, okay. So, and then I remember, I think it was maybe like, this was over years, but there was one that was interested in seeing if it could work. And so I sent an email, and the lady responded and was like, no, but she was like, don't worry, we haven't forgot about you. And I was like, whatever. I just kind of was like, that's your nice way of saying it.
Yeah.
And it was like the next week.
Oh, wow.
They called me and they were like, we have a match for you. And what's even funnier with that timing is like earlier that week, I think it's in my book. The dates are in my book. I can't remember them right now.
Yeah.
But it was like a weekend in May or something. But I had a campfire out in my backyard. It was just me and Jesus. And I was out there just praying and talking to him. And And I stayed out late, but I remember just saying to him, I was finally at a place of
Mm,
like enough healing. I still had lots to do, but like this place of like, God, if it's just you and me for the rest of my
mhm,
life, like I'm good with that. And I remember saying that audibly to him,
mm.
just as a declaration of like, if this is what you have for
Yeah.
me, this will be good, you
That's
know?
your surrender.
Yeah, and it was my
Yeah.
surrender. And so that was like the weekend. And then I think they called me like Tuesday or Wednesday. And I was just like, what? And then it was like a 3-week period of getting that call until she moved in with me full time. So it was, and
Amazing.
it wasn't one of the kids I'd ever fostered, which is really cool.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think what I remember and go back to is like I in my mind had all of these other kids like this would be perfect. Like I could logically work it out why this would be a good match. And
Hmm.
it was always no, 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 no. But then it's like when the one that he had
Yeah.
prepared or the one that he'd set up. Like it's just so much more clear. Like it's just perfect. Like she's a perfect match.
Yeah.
And it's just like there's so many little things and little ways that God affirmed, like this is what I have
Hmm.
planned for you. And so I go back to that memory very often. When I get a no, I go back to that and be like, God said no here, but then look what he provided. So I'm going to
Yeah.
trust he's going to do the
Trust
same
him.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. I just love that story so much. It just gets my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that you were single and you had the hook spot, to
Yeah.
say, I'm going to adopt a child.
Yeah.
And I'm sure other people have done it, but it's not something you hear very often.
No, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Like I think most people were supportive. There
Yeah.
were some people just from where they had come from and their mindsets, they weren't fond of the idea. And I think it was just coming from the place where like this is what a family's supposed to look like. And so
Hmm.
I had prayed about it and I felt like, yeah, I totally believe that this is God's idea for what a family should look like. But like the world's broken. And
Yeah.
like when this little person's born into this world, like, and it hasn't happened that way, their
Hmm.
family's already broken. So my mindset was like, if I have the ability and desire to love on some kids, why not? Right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not making it any worse. Like, and so that was kind of my mindset. So it was opening that door. And if that's what God wanted, he would provide. And then continue to pray. Like for me, it wasn't like, okay, well, that happened and now it's done. It was then praying, what does it look like for moving forward? Like, is
Yeah.
this our family unit? Will it change? And I mean, my daughter had her own questions about that too. So then it was this season of like
Hmm.
being able to be proud of who we were as a family unit, even though we looked different and even though we
Yeah.
came together differently, which is still the case. I think our entire lives will be
Well,
like,
and people would make all sorts of assumptions
oh,
too, right? See you at the
100%.
grocery store, no
Yeah.
ring. They're like, oh, there's another single mom. And you were a single mom, but
Yeah.
they have these ideas of how that happened, right?
100%. And I
Yeah,
remember being like, well, like, whatever. Like, that's just, it is what it
it
is.
is. Yeah.
And I just had to not care what people thought. But it was an interesting journey. And it really showed me like the people that were really supportive. And again, you just appreciate that when
Hmm.
people are. And even if it's not a choice that they would make themselves, but they were like, yeah, we are with you. We're here. And so it was
Hmm.
just a really beautiful process as well. So,
Yeah. And so cool how God met that desire of your heart.
yeah.
Yeah. But what gets me too is the place that you came to with the Lord,
Yeah.
that, you know what? It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay if it's just me and you forever. It's okay. And that was settled in your heart. And I think that's not an easy place to get to. And sometimes we think we've gotten there and we really haven't.
I did that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm good enough, God. I'm
Yeah.
good enough. I'm ready.
Yeah.
But I can look back in my own life too. And I'm not going to tell all my story right now because this is about you today. But same for me. When I first connected with my husband,
Yeah.
my second husband, the man that loves me today. I had been in a string of bad situations too, and the Lord spoke to me specifically to cut all the ties
Yeah.
and to not have a back door. And I was like, you know what, God, if I'm single for the rest of my life, I don't care.
Yeah.
And I truly did not care.
Yeah.
I had done it my own way long enough.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know better.
Yeah.
And I just want to be content with you. It was literally like minutes after that
That's
that I
so
got this
cool.
message and I didn't even know who this guy was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I held off for a little bit, but and lo and behold, he's now my husband. But it was genuine, sincere surrender
Yeah.
of my will for his will. And I think that is such a key.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw the same thing again. with my husband. It's actually
Yes. Tell
hilarious.
us about that.
Yeah. So like this book, like it's not just about being single, but obviously because I had such a long season of singleness,
Yeah.
a lot of my examples like are going to be related to the fact that I'm single. And so there's a lot in there that is me processing that. But anyway, it's not just for single people. So if you read it, there's more to take away from that.
Yes.
But what was cool is I think in a way like that, me writing that book was kind of like a final declaration of my surrendering in that area of like,
Mm-hmm.
if I am a single mother for the rest of my life, or if it's just me and I'm not going to have a husband,
Mm-hmm.
like I know you will sustain me. I know you will have good things for us, and I'm excited about them. And it took
Mm-hmm.
me a long time to get there, but I did. So, and I feel like that the book was the final like stamp of I'm willing to like declare this and tell you this, you know? And so, yeah. So, and then I finished my book, and 2 weeks later, I met my husband.
Seriously.
Yeah. So, and then like that was funny enough, but then it was like the week of our wedding, 4 days before our wedding is when the book arrived in the mail, like a real copy. And I was like, this is ridiculous, Jesus. Like, I
Yeah.
was like, okay, I get it. So it's been really, really
Yeah.
funny, but like, again, beautiful. Like it's
Yeah,
just been
it's
amazing.
such a beautiful story, and I love the grace and the redeeming power of God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Me too.
it's just, I mean, I've experienced it, you've experienced. I love the realness and the rawness of your story. And I think so many people can relate. Maybe they weren't single as long, maybe they didn't adopt a child, but the brokenness and the surrender and the when we are trying to walk out life, we have these ideas of what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Nobody plans that they're going to get a divorce when they get married. Nobody plans to be in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Nobody plans, to have an illness adjust the trajectory of their life. These things happen. It's a broken world, sin is in the world, and thus so is pain.
Yep.
And so, and of course, we make our own decisions too that add difficulty
Yeah.
to everything else. But I mean, this is life.
Yeah.
And God is so good and He's so gracious. And I don't know, I probably the same for you, but every time I sing or hear the song, The Goodness of God,
Oh,
I can
such a good
barely
one.
get through the song. If I'm really strong, I can get through without breaking and
Yeah.
crying, but when you've experienced brokenness and then have been met with God's goodness,
Yeah.
and you look back and say, if it wasn't for you, I don't know if I'd be here. If it wasn't for you, I'd still be there, or maybe not at all.
Yeah.
And you see where you were and where He's brought you. It's overwhelming,
Yeah.
And so if you're somewhere on that journey, if you're still in the muck, or maybe you're on the other side of it, like there is a good side. When you reach that point of surrender,
Yeah.
the healing and the grace of God, just you surrender and it allows Him to come and do these things in your life.
Yeah.
The other thing is He knows what we need even better than we do.
Yeah.
And so He will bring beauty out of your brokenness. He promises to work all things for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. And you're like a shining, living example of that, and life keeps going. So it may not always look picture perfect, and things are going to come up. And like you're in a new relationship. I'm 8 years into my marriage. And you know what? Sometimes things come up and you're like, oh my goodness, we need to deal with this. Like it's never perfect.
No.
It's never perfect. And stuff will happen down the road, guaranteed. But God is faithful.
Yeah.
And He's brought you through, and He'll do it again.
100%.
It's so good.
Well, and I totally agree with you. And just when you were sharing that, it just kind of took me back to there was a time in my life because of the things that had happened that I really do think in my mind, I thought that God was withholding good things for me.
Mhm.
Like I couldn't understand if He wanted good things for me, then why all this,
Exactly.
And I had some really hard things happen as
Mhm.
a child and into my adolescence. And so there was a long time where I didn't believe that. And I remember I was down in California at a church, and the worship leader she just kept repeating this phrase, the Father does not withhold good things
Mm.
from us. And I was like, what?
You're like,
it hit me. Like, I'm like, I don't remember that. And then my friend's like, that's in the Bible. And I'm like, what? Like, I actually
yeah.
So I went and looked it up. And I'm like, it is in the Bible. So I had
Go figure.
I know, which is like nuts, but like the fact that it hit me so hard.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I didn't believe it, right? And so I came home, I found it. I actually painted like a picture of this verse. I put it up in the bathroom, and like I read it every day because I was like, I don't believe this, and I want to because it's truth.
Yeah.
And I need to repeat this truth until I actually believe it. And so it was definitely an act more of just step by step rather than feeling, because I still didn't feel it. But I was like, it struck me, And at that same conference, it was the first time I ever heard the song Defender. It's by there's a bunch of people that do it, but Rita Springer
Okay.
is the version that I know. So anyway, they sang Defender, and it was the first time that I ever heard it. I felt like it was written for me, and I just bawled like a beautiful, just like I'd never felt like someone had hit my heart like so clearly. That whole trip was just like this beautiful gift from the Lord of just being known and being seen and being pursued.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just, I look back at it and I just remember I had a prophetic word too from a lady there at that time. And she just talked about God restoring broken dreams. And at this point, it was all just, in my mind, hypothetical. I hadn't seen the fruit, right?
Yes.
Like I wanted to, but I'm like, oh. And so, and just in this last season, like the last 2 months of being married and stuff, that phrase just keeps going in my mind of like, he is restoring broken dreams. And there were things that were like totally gone for me that like he has restored. And it's been so beautiful. Like, it's amazing. And so just walking that out, like it doesn't always feel like there are good things. It doesn't always feel good, but trusting his word and trusting what he says and telling him when you feel that way. Like, and I've like, there's been times when I'm like, God, I need you. I just need you to give me this obvious, like, you pursuing me because I'm just struggling right now, like not putting it on him or blaming him, but just being like, could you please do this for me, And he has, like, in his beautiful ways. So I think just being raw and vulnerable with him, I'm always like, he always knows how I feel anyway. So whether it's in my mind or actually saying it out loud, he knows.
He's really not afraid of our humanness and our broken states. And we can be honest. You're talking about like being pursued. And I just feel like there's people that need to understand that he pursues them, that you are the object of his affection and he wants good for you, no matter what you've done, no matter how low you value yourself, you're the apple of his eye. You're the object of his affection. You're his desire. The Bible says for the joy set before him, he faced the cross. And we were the joy set before him. And I think, really, like for me, you had so much joy because you thought you could have a relationship with me, but you endured for me. And I've done all this stuff. I was angry at God too. And, you don't understand, like, why would you let this happen to me? I'm a good Christian girl. I did my best. And then you should have seen these things, It's funny how we blame God for our own ignorance, but he's just so good.
He is.
And if we allow him to, he will come and he will walk us through the healing and he will bring restoration. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I want to pop over to your book for a minute, Sweet Sustenance. So the one story that pops into my mind, I'll just give a little, I don't even remember how it ended, but I remember my guts were like, oh, what's going to happen? You were paddleboarding and you were out on the lake and you're paddleboarding back home. Was it the lake or the ocean? Was it the lake? Okay. And you had no life jacket or anything and you got out. And then the wind changed or something. And oh my goodness, my heart was like, oh, I have a little bit of anxiety about the water. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Okay. Well, it's kind of funny because my sister-in-law read my book and then she called me out on it because like at the end of that story, I'm like, I learned my lesson. I'll always wear a life jacket. And then this summer, I didn't go as far, but I was out a little bit. And she was like, so I read that in your book and you're totally out there without a life jacket. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. So I think we grew up around water. And so I don't think I have enough of a fear of water. Like I'm like, we're good. And so always wear a life jacket when doing water sports. That is my thing for people. But yeah, so I love paddleboarding. It's like it is just my thing. I go with my dog. I have a paddleboarding playlist called Peace on the Water.
Nice.
And it just has like my favorite songs. And it just puts me in this place that I'm just like talking to God, singing these songs. It's one of my favorite things to do. So anyway, I had a whole day of like freedom. I don't know where my daughter was, but I was like, I have the whole day. I'm going to like do a real adventure. So I ended up paddleboarding down to the other end of the lake. So this was the farthest I'd ever gone. And in my mind, I was like paddling against the wind. So it was a little bit harder, but I'm like, it's the beginning of my journey. Like I'm going to get to the end and then I'm going to just relax and the wind's going to bring me back.
Right.
And so I had this like wonderful vision of me sailing back, like laying on the board. Anyway, so it took me like an hour, hour and a half, I think, to get to that end, somewhere around there. As I'm going, the wind is starting to shift just
Oh,
because, Mother Nature. So by the time I got to the end and turned around this island, which was kind of my destination point, the wind had completely shifted the opposite direction and was like way stronger, to the point where like I was actually worried. Like I'm like,
yeah.
how are we gonna get home? And my dog, who loves paddleboarding, was like whimpering and like standing up and like looking for like a way to get to shore. And I was like, okay, everyone stay calm.
I might have overdone it.
I totally did. And like, yeah. And like, I don't even know if anyone knew where I was. It was not a wise decision. But anyway, and so I really had to just dig in. I didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just like, I have to use everything I have and focus and get back home. It was so hard. It was really, really hard. And I just prayed, but I was so frustrated because I just thought like I had this vision of what it was going to be. And that's what I was working towards. And then it was just gone. And instead of just losing the vision, it was even harder. And so I was annoyed. I was annoyed with the situation. But like God really works with metaphors for me. Like that's just, so I got home and I'm like, God's going to use this as a metaphor for sure.
Yes.
And so as the days passed, I was like, this is exactly like life. Like you plan things out and you have good plans. You're like, and you have this idea of like, when I get to this point, this is what I get to look forward to, or this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to unfold. And then you get there and it does not. And like, sometimes it could be better. It could be worse. It could be different, but it's just like, that is the human experience in life. Like it does not unfold how you plan. And even when parts of it do, maybe something else doesn't, or something adds, And so I thought it's like, the metaphor built from there of like, what do you do when you get to that place? And you're like, well, crap, this isn't what I wanted. You know what I mean? And then fighting through. And so like, and what emotion does that evoke? Like, do you give up? Do you get mad? Do you get back? Like where do you fight from? Right. And then like, what's the healthy way to handle this? Because like it or not, it's going to happen to you, And so that's kind of where my book starts. When things fall apart, what do you
then
do?
what?
Yeah.
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 Oh, I did make it safely back home.
Yeah.
I was exhausted.
Seriously, I was so like tense and like, what's going to happen? It was a great part of the book, by the way. So Julianna's book, His Sweet Sustenance, I'll put a link in our show notes for that so people can just order it. And it's full of great stories. And it's so applicable. I love how you share little bits about your life and your journey, and then how God taught you through that and what he's saying. And so, order her book. It's fantastic. It's an easy read. It's like sit down, have a cup of coffee and just feed your soul, So I'll put those links in there, and any other contact links that we have for you, we'll put in there as well. And thank you so much for sharing your story and being vulnerable with the real and raw parts of, your journey. And I think that connects with people, connects with me. I just hope and pray that people can see and recognize God's hand in all of this and have hope for their own journey. So
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I've just been excited. Like I knew all along, God told me like he would use my story for others. And I was in this season so long, I'm like, I'm not in a place to help others yet, And so it was like healing and things like that. And I finally feel like I'm at a place where I'm able to share my story. I'm able to encourage others. Yeah. And so I'm so excited to see how God will use that. And so this is those first steps of that happening. And so I'm really, I'm feeling blessed that I have this platform with you to share this and encourage people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Made on Purpose. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to follow, subscribe, and share so that we can share this story with others. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.